Ever wondered how criminals were punished before modern prisons? Could you survive medieval justice? Would you rather face a modern court or a medieval one? Number 11. The Brazen Bull. Imagine being slowly roasted alive inside a hollow metal bull while your screams are transformed into the sounds of an angry bull through specially designed acoustic pipes. This wasn't a nightmare, it was a real execution method. The Brazen Bull, invented by Perillos of Athens around 560 BCE, was one of the most horrifying execution devices in history. The condemned would be placed inside the metal bull, and a fire would be lit beneath it. As the metal heated, the person inside would be slowly cooked to death. The truly twisted part. The bull was designed with a complex series of tubes and pipes so that the victim's screams would sound like the bellowing of a bull. Talk about adding insult to fatal injury. Legend has it that Phalaris, the tyrant who commissioned the bull, tested it on its inventor first. Apparently, even brutal dictators appreciate a bit of irony. The device remained in use for centuries, with reports of it being used by various Roman emperors against Christians. A reminder that human creativity has an unfortunately dark side too. Number 10. Trial by ordeal. Did God decide who was guilty? Medieval folks thought so. Trial by ordeal was based on the belief that God would protect the innocent from harm during physically dangerous tests. One popular version was trial by hot iron, where the accused had to carry a red-hot iron bar for several steps. After 3 days, their burns would be examined. Clean wounds, innocent, infected, guilty as charged. Another crowd pleaser was trial by water. Suspects were bound and tossed into bodies of water. The logic. Water being pure would reject the guilty, meaning if you floated, you were clearly in cahoots with the devil and would face execution. If you sank and potentially drowned, congratulations, you were innocent. Some lucky winners might be pulled out before drowning completely. Trial by ordeal wasn't just random torture, it was deeply connected to religious beliefs of divine intervention. The practice was finally forbidden by the Catholic Church in 1215 when Pope Innocent III banned clergy participation in these trials. Interestingly, some historians suggest these trials actually worked relatively well as a primitive lie detector test. The truly innocent might confidently undergo the ordeal, believing God would protect them, while the guilty might confess rather than face certain pain or death. Number 9. The breaking wheel. How many ways could your bones break before death took mercy on you? The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, would answer that question in excruciating detail. This torture device gained popularity throughout Europe from antiquity until the 19th century. Here's how it worked. The condemned would be strapped to a large wooden wheel. Then the executioner would use an iron hammer to break the victim's limbs between the gaps in the wheel. But wait, it gets worse. After breaking all major limbs and joints, the shattered victim would be woven through the spokes of the wheel, their mangled limbs threaded through the spaces. The wheel would then be mounted on a pole and left for public display, sometimes for days, with the victim still alive and suffering. Birds would often peck at the exposed flesh, adding yet another layer of agony. This punishment was typically reserved for the worst crimes like murder and robbery, though standards varied greatly by region. In some areas, the executioner might deliver a coup de grace, a mercy blow to the chest or stomach to end the suffering quicker. In an interesting historical footnote, Saint Catherine of Alexandria was allegedly sentenced to die on the breaking wheel around 305 CE, but according to legend, the wheel miraculously broke upon touching her. She was subsequently beheaded instead, and the device became known as the Catherine wheel in many regions. Number 8. Pressing. Ever feel the weight of the world on your shoulders? Medieval criminals experienced it literally. Pressing, also called peine forte et dure, strong and hard punishment, was particularly common in England. The procedure was brutally simple. The accused would be laid on their back on the ground, and a heavy wooden board would be placed on top of them. Then rocks or weights would be gradually added to the board. The weight would slowly increase until the victim either confessed to their crime or was crushed to death. What makes this punishment particularly bizarre is that it wasn't always used to punish convicted criminals. It was often used to force accused individuals to enter a plea guilty or not guilty. Under English common law, a person who refused to enter a plea couldn't be tried. Some defendants, knowing they faced certain conviction and forfeiture of property which would leave their families destitute, would choose pressing instead. By dying without a conviction, their families could inherit their estate. One famous case is that of Giles Corey, an 81-year-old man accused during the Salem witch trials in 1692. When he refused to enter a plea, he was subjected to pressing. His last words were reportedly "more weight," showing remarkable defiance. The pressing procedure could last several days before death finally came from asphyxiation or crush injuries. The practice continued in England until 1772, when refusing to enter a plea was automatically counted as a guilty plea. Number 7. Scold's bridle. Women who talked too much needed to be silenced, right? That's exactly what medieval authorities thought when they created the scold's bridle, also known as the branks. This horrifying head cage was designed specifically to punish women accused of gossiping, arguing with neighbors, or speaking out against their husbands, essentially any woman deemed too outspoken. The device consisted of an iron framework placed over the head with a metal bit or plate that pressed down on the tongue. Some versions had spikes on the tongue piece, ensuring that any attempt to speak would result in a painfully punctured tongue. Once locked in the bridle, women would be led through town on a leash, often by their husbands, so everyone could mock and humiliate them. The public shaming aspect was considered as important as the physical discomfort. The scold's bridle first appeared in 16th century Britain and remained in use until the early 19th century. Interestingly, men were rarely subjected to this punishment, reflecting the deep gender inequalities of the time. What constituted scolding was entirely subjective, making it a convenient tool for silencing any woman who challenged authority or social norms. Some museums in Britain still display these devices, grim reminders of how women's speech was literally policed. In Scotland, records show a woman named Jenny Geddes was fitted with a scold's bridle after she threw a stool at a minister during church service in 1637, protesting religious reforms. Number 6. Drowning in a cage. Fancy a swim. Medieval criminals certainly didn't when it came in the form of drowning cages. This method of execution was particularly popular in Europe, especially for women convicted of murder. The condemned would be placed in a large cage or basket, which would then be lowered into a river or lake until they drowned. In some regions, the cage was designed to hold the prisoner just below the water's surface, prolonging their suffering as they struggled for air. What made this punishment extra cruel was the public spectacle. The drowning typically took place from a bridge in the center of town, with large crowds gathering to watch. Family members of the condemned might be forced to watch their loved one's death throes. Sometimes the cage would be left hanging from the bridge after the execution as a warning to others. In certain areas, notably parts of Germany and Switzerland, the drowning cage had a macabre innovation. It was designed to eventually open at the bottom after the person had died, releasing the body to be carried away by the current. This saved officials the trouble of burial and was considered a final indignity, as proper burial was extremely important in medieval Christian society. Historical records from Nuremberg, Germany, document the use of drowning cages well into the 17th century. Interestingly, while hanging was the preferred method for executing men, drowning was often considered more decent for women, as it preserved modesty by preventing the condemned from being displayed in a publicly humiliating position. Number 5. The pear of anguish. What medieval torture device expanded inside your most sensitive body parts? The pear of anguish, a pear-shaped metal device with segments that could be spread apart using a screw mechanism, was inserted into various orifices of the human body depending on the crime. For blasphemers, it went into the mouth. For women accused of witchcraft or abortion, it was inserted vaginally. For homosexual men or those accused of sodomy, it was used rectally. Once inside, the torturer would turn the screw, causing the petals of the pear to slowly spread apart, mutilating the victim from the inside. The pain was excruciating and the damage often permanent. While some historians debate how widely it was actually used, contemporary accounts describe this device being employed throughout Europe during the Middle Ages and Renaissance period. One particularly nasty version included spikes on the expanding segments, causing additional internal trauma. Survivors of this torture would suffer lifelong injuries and pain. The psychological terror of the device was perhaps as powerful as its physical effects. The threat of the pear of anguish might be enough to extract confessions without even using it. Adding to the horror, the device was sometimes heated before insertion, combining burning and stretching injuries. The pear of anguish exemplifies how medieval punishment often sought to make the punishment match the crime in a perversely poetic way, punishing the part of the body that had sinned. Number 4. Rat torture. What's worse than facing a rat? How about a hungry rat that sees you as the only meal ticket? Rat torture was particularly horrific and was used in various forms across multiple cultures and time periods. The most common method involved placing a rat on the victim's body, usually the stomach or chest, and covering it with a metal container. The container would then be slowly heated, causing the rat to panic. With no escape route except through the victim's body, the rat would begin to gnaw and dig its way through flesh in a desperate attempt to escape the heat. The victim would remain conscious through much of this ordeal, experiencing the rat's frantic clawing and biting in real time. This method was reportedly used during the Dutch revolt against Spain in the 16th century and appeared in various European countries through the medieval and Renaissance periods. A variation involved multiple rats placed in a bucket strapped against the naked torso, with the open end against the skin. Again, heat would be applied to drive the rats to burrow into the victim. What made this torture particularly effective was not just the physical pain, but the psychological horror of feeling the creatures moving inside one's body. The torture could last for hours, and even if victims survived the initial ordeal, infection would likely kill them afterward. Despite its medieval origins, variations of rat torture continued to be used in more recent history, with documented cases during various 20th century conflicts, proving that human cruelty knows few bounds regardless of the era. Number 3. The Judas Cradle. How slowly could you be impaled? The Judas Cradle would show you exactly how long that process could take. This torture device consisted of a pyramid-shaped seat with the point facing upward. The victim would be placed on top of the point, usually naked, with the tip inserted into the anus or vagina. Then, using ropes, the torturer would lower the victim onto the device, allowing gravity to slowly force the point deeper into the body. What made this torture particularly cruel was its duration. Sometimes lasting for days, the victim would be suspended above the device in such a way that they couldn't maintain a standing position forever. As their muscles fatigued, they would slowly sink further onto the point. To extend the suffering, torturers would sometimes add weights to the victim's legs or oil the point to prevent too much damage too quickly. The device was named after Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus, suggesting it was meant particularly for traitors and heretics. The Judas Cradle gained popularity during the Spanish Inquisition, but was used throughout Europe. Unlike some torture methods that aim to extract confessions, the Judas Cradle was primarily a punishment device once sentenced to it. There was rarely any reprieve regardless of what the victim might confess to. Death eventually came from a combination of blood loss, dehydration, and shock. The psychological component shouldn't be overlooked. The anticipation of slowly sinking further was a form of mental torture that accompanied the physical pain. While some modern BDSM devices have borrowed the name, they bear little resemblance to the lethal original version. Number 2. Keel hauling. Thought pirate punishment was just walking the plank. Keel hauling makes that look like a day at the beach. This naval punishment was particularly associated with the Dutch Navy in the 17th and 18th centuries, though other European navies adopted it as well. The process was brutally simple. The condemned sailor would have a rope tied around their waist and then be thrown overboard from one side of the ship. The rope would run under the keel, the bottom of the vessel, and the sailor would be dragged to the other side. This meant being pulled underwater and along the bottom of the ship, which was typically covered in barnacles and sharp shells that would shred the victim's flesh like sandpaper. The ships of this era were also treated with various toxic substances to prevent marine growth, adding chemical burns to the injury list. If the underwater journey didn't drown the sailor outright, they would emerge on the other side severely lacerated, sometimes with limbs torn off by the pressure and friction. Many victims died during the process, either from drowning or blood loss. For those who survived, infection from the numerous deep cuts was a common cause of death in the days following. What made keel hauling particularly feared was that it combined three terrifying elements: drowning, severe physical trauma, and public humiliation, as the entire ship's company would be assembled to witness the punishment. The term has survived in modern language. To keelhaul someone means to subject them to severe criticism or reprimand, though the modern usage fortunately lacks the literal brutality of its origin. Number 1. Dancing mania punishment. Would you dance until you drop dead? In medieval Europe, some people didn't have a choice. The dancing plague or dancing mania wasn't a formal punishment in the traditional sense, but rather a bizarre phenomenon that some communities interpreted as divine punishment for sins. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, there were numerous documented outbreaks of uncontrollable dancing that affected dozens or sometimes hundreds of people at once. Victims would dance erratically, sometimes for days without rest, until they collapsed from exhaustion, had heart attacks, or suffered strokes. The most famous case occurred in Strasbourg in 1518, when a woman named Frau Troffea began dancing in the street. Within a week, 34 others had joined her, and within a month, there were around 400 dancers. Many died from heart attacks, strokes, or exhaustion. Bizarrely, local authorities initially encouraged the dancing, believing the afflicted needed to dance out their sickness. They even hired musicians and professional dancers to keep things going, inadvertently making the situation worse. While modern scientists believe these outbreaks might have been caused by food poisoning from ergot fungus, which contains compounds similar to LSD, mass psychogenic illness, or stress-induced psychosis, medieval people viewed it differently. Many saw it as punishment from Saint Vitus or Saint John for moral failings. Others believed it was the work of demons or the devil. The dancing mania serves as a reminder that in medieval times, the line between punishment, disease, and supernatural occurrence was often blurry, with natural phenomena frequently interpreted through a moral or religious lens. Would you survive even one day under medieval justice? How many of these punishments have modern equivalents we don't recognize? When we look at our current justice system, are we really so far removed from our medieval ancestors?